236 pretty much we looked at tight and loose cultures was the last segment that I looked at. The next section of the textbook talks about face and face work. So I wanted to kind of focus on that one a little bit. I think this is something that many of you are familiar with. Maybe not in those exact words, but I think once you understand the concept of face and face work, I think you will understand, you know, what that means essentially. Okay. So this is an important sort of say area in anthropology in general is to understand what is this concept of face. What is face? And this is the way the textbook describes it. Okay, so I'm just going to look at his here. As they say, face is commonly used as a metaphor to designate self-image a person projects to other people. So that's what face is. Face is a self-image. It's a metaphor for self-image. In other words, they say your face is your public identity, how you are perceived by others. Okay, so that's an idea of face. That doesn't necessarily mean this is how you are, but it means that that is a public self-image that you present, or it is a public self-image that is perceived by other people. Maybe you want to present yourself in a certain way and it doesn't quite come out, and people still see you as something else or in some other way. So this is where face work comes in. Face work is basically this attempts that people have to try to maintain a certain persona or to give a certain information about themselves out, you know, present themselves in a certain way. That's the idea of face work. So if this is what these terms mean. Does that make sense? Are you familiar with what I'm talking about, or you have never heard this before and you have no idea what I'm talking about?
I never heard
Never
this
heard
word.
this?
No.
Okay. All right. Yeah. This is fun. This is new for you. That's good. It's good when you come across something you haven't heard because then it's an opportunity to learn, right? So that's good. So the concept of face is actually it's across all cultures. It exists in all cultures. I mean, just think about Facebook, right? What is that all about? It's about you presenting yourself to the world. And you know what people get upset about Facebook? There's a lot of people who have trouble with Facebook. They get so upset. It like depresses them, because they go on Facebook and it's not reality. So what do people put on Facebook? Oh, I bought a new car. Oh, I graduated from college. Oh, look at my kid. Look how cute they are. Or do this, look at this, look at my cat, look at this, my new that. So it's always something positive, right? It's always something nice. They don't come and say, look at what my kid did. He just destroyed my whole kitchen. He tore everything apart. They don't put those pictures on Facebook, right? They're not going to say, you will not believe how my husband yelled at me this morning. These are the words he said. And then a person quotes that, you think about that all day now. They don't put that on online about themselves. So some people in the digital world call it fake book, not Facebook, because people put fake stuff on there. In a sense, that's not their real life. It's the life I want you to see, but it's not what it really is. You know, my kids are running crazy, fighting and screaming and yelling, and I'm going to put a cute picture online and see how angelic they are. No, they're not angelic. They're about to kill each other. But that's what I want you to see. So this is kind of like what the concept of face is. And that's before Facebook, before digital, before anything like that. We want to present a certain image of ourselves. You know, why in some cultures, getting dressed up is a big deal. You know, I'll tell you this, like American culture today is a really casual culture, right? People dress down. I mean, people wear t-shirts and flip-flops everywhere and things like that. But even in America, we have this concept where we say dress to impress. Now, you can be overdressed, you know, but if you're really nicely dressed and you're meeting somebody for the first time, it is most likely that they will have a very positive, sort of say, impression of you because how you dress can be very impressive. Being neatly dressed and, having everything sort of say wrinkle free and crisp and everything, and all of a sudden it creates a persona. It creates a perspective that, hey, this is a person who's neat and upright and organized. Look how nice their clothes looks. Versus somebody who comes to meet you and their shirt is all crumpled up and their tie is halfway untied or something like that, and their shirt is hanging out. On one side it's tucked in, on the other side it's hanging out. And you look at that person and say, if that's how they care about getting dressed and looking, then what else do they care about in life like that? So imagine coming to a job interview looking like that, and people say, well, if this is how you treat your clothes and this is how you care about getting dressed, how are you going to care about my customers, or how are you going to care about my stuff that I'm selling? I don't want to hire you. Obviously you're not a person who cares about these kinds of things, so you're not responsible enough. So silly thing like getting dressed a certain way can actually create a perception in a person's mind that's positive or negative view. It may not be absolutely true. It could be completely untrue, but nevertheless perceptions are perceptions. So we want to present a certain face, to the outside world. We want to be thought of always. I mean, this is normal human thing to be thought of better than you are. You always want everyone to think that you're better than what you really are. So if you're smart, you want people to think that you are brilliant, that you're a genius. Okay. You don't just want people to think you're smart. You just want people to think you're a genius, so that they just put you on a pedestal and practically worship you because that's how smart you are. Or if you're talented, you want people to think that you're so talented you could do anything. Again, it's that idea of creating the most possibly prestige or positive outlook that people should have upon you. So that's the idea of face work. A lot of it has to do with how people perceive what's honorable, what's desirable, what's good, what's bad. So people do this to maintain their status, to create their status, and to influence how other people see them in culture. So it kind of feeds, this whole idea feeds into a very interesting uh, dimension. Cultures that are collectivistic versus cultures that are individualistic treat the idea of face a little bit differently. We all have it. All cultures have it. It doesn't really matter. But in collectivistic cultures, people have a greater concern for other people's face. So that means it's not just important how I look to the other world, to the outside world, but how other people look is also important. In fact, it's even more important. My identity in a collectivistic culture is wrapped up with other people. So if I'm going to, um, do certain things, I'm going to wonder how me doing something will affect other people. Like, if I do this, what would everyone else in my family be thought of? Would that reflect badly on my parents or something like that? And you think about that. Would that reflect badly on my family if I do this? You know, and in a lot of cultures, in collectivistic cultures, this is a really big deal, where other people's face is what you are a lot of times protecting, not just your own face. It's not just about you being able to project yourself in a positive way or a negative way, or repair the image that you might have damaged by doing something wrong, but it's also about other people and how they are perceived. So This is a pretty big deal. So in collectivistic cultures, it's not just about your presentation of yourself. You always think about how other people are now perceived because of how you are perceived because you are part of that group. So in many ways, it's a group identity and a group presentation as well. But we do maintain that. And so a lot of times people are very regulated, very careful about not doing something that would damage their reputation and therefore damage the reputation that they're a part of. If they're part of a larger group, at least that is how they're perceived, that is how they're seen. So if I damage my reputation, then it damages everyone else's reputation and they didn't even do anything. See, that's the idea. So this is the concept of face and face work, presenting a very particular outlook to the outside world, how you want to be seen. So it's actually quite a deep area of study in sociology. If you guys are ever interested in this, you might have come across this many times. So again, cultures uh, basically fail at presenting. People can fail in presenting a certain face, or they can succeed. People a lot of times engage into what we call face repair work. Essentially, what they're doing is they've done something bad. They've done something that their culture considers to be undesirable, and by doing that, they've brought certain amount of shame or discomfort. They've lowered the reputation their own, but by doing that, they've also hurt other people who are associated with them. So people go to repair that by certain actions that would redeem them essentially. And they're trying to reconstruct that image that they had. So, for example, if you have an image of somebody who is really collected, really reserved, calm, not very soft spoken person, always reasonable, always never loses their temper, and all of a sudden you see that person scream and yell at somebody, like at their kids or something like that, they lose their patience and they finally push their buttons and they just lose it and they scream and they yell and they shout, your image of them is shattered because you had this image of this person who always has it together, who never loses their cool, always fair, always quiet, always polite, and all of a sudden you hear them scream out words, and those words are bad words, they're profanities or something like that. All of a sudden you're like, oh, I really misjudged this person. Maybe they're not as good as I thought. Maybe they're not as polite. Maybe they're not as cultured. Maybe the kind of person that would use his words like that, oh my God, I don't associate with people like that. All of a sudden, now you are reacting to what you're seeing, and the face that the person has constructed does not match with reality. So when that happens, what is that person going to do? They're going to have to go into a repair mode. They're going to have to try to gain back that positive face that they had before. And it may be possible, maybe impossible. It depends on the situation, but it may be possible for them to gain it back. So um, that's what happens sometimes. I'm using an extreme situation, but you can see how in some other scenario, people would fail to present the image that they have, want everyone to see, and they would work hard to essentially, you know, reestablish that image for themselves because that is in the end how they want to be seen. That's the person they want to be. Let's put it that way. If that's not who they are, and sometimes it goes the other way around, where people have a negative perception of someone, where in reality they're a much better person, and that's because they're not very good at about constructing their public face, and that's what it is. So okay, anyway, so that deals into communication. How? Because a lot of times, if you understand this concept, if you understand this particular uh, behavior that people have and why they do what they do, then when you understand their behavior, you're able to perceive in communication what is going on. So you could say, oh, okay, this is a person trying to rehabilitate themselves. So what you do is you don't push on it, you let them. Why? Because it's important to, show kindness and let the person rebuild that image, so to say. So in communication, being perceptive, knowing what's going on, what's actually happening in the person you're talking to, is quite valuable. because it allows you to, have a better relationship. All right. So this last section of the textbook, in chapter 6, talks about cultural patterns of communication, which is basically what I already have jumped into. And this last section talks about developing cultural values and awareness. This is exactly what I mean. Why are we studying all this stuff? Why are we going through these anthropological theories? Why are we going in through these sociological definitions of face and face work? Why are we talking about collectivism and individualism? Why are we talking about universalism and exclusivism? Why we use these strange ways of trying to define people's behavior or analyzing different cultures? The whole point of all of this is developing cultural awareness. When you understand how people work and why they do what they do, that essentially it is their cultural pattern that forces them and pushes them in this direction, then you start understanding why people are the way they are. And you tend to be much more gracious and much more forgiving towards them because you realize this is a part of their culture, this is a part of their personality, this is a part of how they were raised. You don't have to like it, you don't have to agree with it. All you have to do is be understanding of it. And when we become understanding of how other people are, we basically, you know, recognize those differences, and we do not focus on those differences anymore. They become less aggravating to us, they become less bothersome to us. We are able to deal with those differences in a much more uh, constructive way rather than just have an emotion or a feeling that is a negative emotion or a negative feeling because you don't like something, because you're coming against something that you are not or is different from you. And so the tendency a lot of times is to push back. When people do not know or do not study other cultures, they treat other cultures with insensitivity and arrogance, sometimes violence, uh, huge disdain, serious prejudice and things like that happens when you don't understand why people are the way they are. You just say, why can't they just be like me? All right. And then you get mad at them for not being like you. And the reason why people are like that is because they don't understand that you are the way you are because of what your culture has handed to you. It's not that, we talked about this idea of ethnocentricity, where we're focused on our own culture. We think that our culture is the best. Whatever our culture is, doesn't really matter. Everybody thinks their culture is the best, or their culture has this a particular area of life handled better than everybody else. And so it's a tendency to be ethnocentric. And so we look at everyone else and we measure them with the same cultural perspective that we possess. But by learning other people's cultural perspectives, we're able not to put people into the same box where we are. And we're allowing some divergence to them, and we become more sensitive. So the fundamental part of learning about other cultures is really understanding why these differences exist. This is important to understand. And this is what these chapters have all been about. This particular chapter was all about the why. Why do we do what we do? Why are we so different? Why some of us are collectivists and others are individualists? Why some of us are oriented this way and others are oriented that way? If you understand the why, you will understand people better, and you will be able to communicate better with them because you can put yourself into their shoes, even in an imperfect way. That works. So there's another table here on page 239 that is kind of presents to you all the different patterns that we've learned, and they're quite telling. This is just a few criteria, but you look at these, and this is quite amazing. You know, individualism versus collectivism, egalitarian approaches versus hierarchical approaches, low culture, low uncertainty avoidance versus high uncertainty avoidance. How do you treat time? Is different. Polychronic, monochronic. low context, high context communication ways. So face concerns, high concern with face versus low concern with face. So, and these are all criterias that will make us communicate one way or another. Basically, depending on where you fit in on this chart, you will communicate accordingly. What you say, how you say it, even if you say it, and the reason why you say it is going to be defined by these categories and how well you fit into these categories. Now, please understand these categories are not objective. This is just studies of different scientists over a period of time, but they're nice ways of trying to understand other people and even to understand yourself, of why we communicate the way we do and why other people communicate differently, because they fit into a different category, because this is important to them and that is important to you. So these are very helpful ways in learning and understanding other cultures, just like when we studied religion, and religion is a part of culture, and that kind of expands your horizon and helps you to understand why people believe what they believe, and why they live a certain way, why they behave a certain way. This is the same uh, aspect that we're looking at here, only necessarily not the religious aspect, more of a social aspect. But so this is not much different. I mean, it's why the book on communication presents you all these perspectives and culture, because it all ends up feeding into the way we communicate. And the whole point of intercultural communication is to be able to communicate across those cultural barriers. Well, if you don't understand what those cultural barriers are, how can you ever cross them? You can't. And that's the whole point of learning how to communicate across the cultural barriers and do it successfully. And that means studying other people's cultures. That means understanding why they do what they do, and how much these things mean to them, and what's important and what's less important to them. So that's the whole point of this. And so it's all about developing cultural awareness and becoming more competent with um, being able to transcend those cultural divides and cultural borders. Like I said, it's not about agreeing with people. You don't study this so you can embrace somebody else's way of life or understand somebody else's way of thinking to the degree that that's going to become your way of thinking. That's not the point of this. Uh, the point of this is to eliminate potential cultural misunderstanding and discord, because this is the area of intercultural communication is where most of the time misunderstanding and discord comes. This is where we make biggest mistakes as human beings, and this is where we come across the biggest obstacles of trying to reach each other, and communicate what we really mean or what we really want to say and how we really feel. So this is where we get the most trouble, which is why studying each other's cultures helps us to avoid some of those sharp turns and hard corners and things like that. If you know that something is important to another person, then you're going to be more careful with it, basically, and you're not going to be disrespectful in that area. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. That pretty much covers our chapter 6. So, any questions, any thoughts, anything you guys want to give me some feedback on? Anyone? Jump in, feel free.
Mm, it was a great chapter. A lot of information. For me, a lot of new information. I never heard some part, but I like it.
I'm glad to
It's
hear that, Addison. Which is This is why I broke up the chapter into two sections. I felt like there was no way I was going to be able to justly
yeah, no, because it's
talk about
different.
this information. Like, you see, it's taken us 2 weeks to discuss all this
Yeah,
because of how detailed and how deep it is. So you personally find this helpful?
yeah, yeah,
Not just in the academic way, like now you're smarter because you know more, but
yeah.
do
Nice.
you see the practical value of this?
Yeah,
You do. That's good. That's awesome. That's what I want everyone in class to see, is the practical application value of learning these things. Knowing other people, understanding other people's cultures, how they think, what they feel, opens all these doors of being able to reach them better. You know, I'm thinking of myself how many times I've been insensitive to somebody because I did not know their culture. I did not understand where they came from, or I assume because they look the way they look, this is how they think or this is who they are, and I mislabeled people. And I'm thinking how many times I've lost an opportunity of a good relationship or maybe offended a person because of
Mhm.
me not being smart enough in this area. Let's put it that way. And so being smart and competent in this area, just makes you better.
Yeah,
So that's good.
yeah,
Thank you. Appreciate that feedback,
yeah.
Addison.
It's good to understand what's going on here because I'm growing in a culture completely different. Brazil is completely different from America.
Very different. Yes.
Everything is different, and this is good for understand. For oh yeah, now I can understand what's because Brazil, yeah, the people are individualist. The culture is more collectivist,
Yes.
but here in America is individualist.
Yes.
I think the way that the government thinks affect the culture because
Absolutely.
Trump, when he say go to the TV, say, "Don't let the immigrants take your jobs." He
Right.
say, "Think in yourself." Then, and in Brazil is different. We have a president that he's more collectivist. He thinks in the nations as a unit, and for me, it's completely different, and it helps a lot to understand. And
It helps you
yeah,
understand why people think the way they think or talk the way they talk and
yeah,
even say the silly things that they say. You say when you hear, a person talk about, immigrants taking your jobs, you're like, what in the world are you talking about? Like, how is this?
yeah, it's not make sense, but
But you see how this helps you to see the other side. This is how they think. And if this is how they think, of course they're going to say that.
mhm,
Because there's no other way for them to say something else. They're not going
mhm,
to say what you would say because they don't think like you do. Not at
yeah,
all. And that changes, it changes your attitude. You
yeah,
become tolerant of people because you're more understanding. They're not being mean, they're being themselves. Don't have to agree, but
mhm,
you have to respect that they're being consistent
yeah,
who they are. That's it.
yeah. That's it.
To me, it's very liberating to understand that about a person, that they're not being, you know, this is not against me, right? I'm an immigrant. He's not speaking against me.
Mhm,
He's just expressing a value that is a cultural
yeah,
value, and no more than that. It's not personal, But to me, of course, it's personal because I take everything like that way. So it's difficult. But I'm glad you see the value of that. I think you appreciate sharing that, Addison. So I'm hoping that you guys have all appreciated these chapters. So we're gonna move forward in chapter 7. So just keep reading this next week. Just go forward to this book. It's not always so easy, but that's why we have these sessions where we go over stuff together, and I try to give you some examples and try to explain it. Um, so next chapter is all on identity. And there's going to be quite a few things that will probably challenge you a little bit on identity. Again, why? Because this is maybe not how your culture understands identity per se, but this is a more of a sociological way of explaining what in the world is identity and how does it work? How is it constructed? So we'll have some good conversations about that. And we're living in the culture where everyone has an identity. And so if you understand how these things are formed, then, it'll be very helpful. Anyway, so that's where we're going to be next week. As I said, I will have the test programmed for you guys. Hopefully by Monday, I will let you know. I'll send you a quick little message that it's ready to go, so you can take it. And so we're just basically just pushing it to a week. Okay. So great.